Welcome to this explainer. Today we're tackling a massive cultural question. Why does the music of the 1980s just refuse to fade away? We're going to dive right into how this single, wildly inventive decade completely rewrote the rules of pop culture forever. Let's kick things off with a pretty wild stat. In a 2010 survey, 11,000 European participants voted the 1980s as the absolute, hands-down favorite music decade of the last 40 years. Think about that for a second. Even with all the streaming tech and endless new genres we have today, people still view the 80s as the absolute peak.
So to figure out exactly how they pulled this off, we're going to break the decade down into 5 key pillars: the visual revolution, the rise of megastars, the second British invasion, blending genres, and finally, fashion, formats, and culture.
Let's jump straight into pillar number 1, the visual revolution, and how MTV sparked a massive paradigm shift.
Before August 1981, a band's image was basically secondary to their sound, right? You just listened to it. But overnight, when MTV debuted, music literally became something you watched. The visual spectacle became just as important as the song itself. If you wanted a hit, you suddenly needed a video. It was a total game changer.
The music critic Robert Christgau actually hit the nail on the head here. He noted that rock was, quote, reconceived as intellectual property, as a form of capital itself. What he means is music wasn't just an auditory art form anymore. It was high-budget visual capital. A video was essentially a massively lucrative cross-promotional advertisement for the song.
And these weren't just cheap promo clips either. They were massive cultural events. You had Michael Jackson bringing us ambitious, cinematic storytelling with Thriller, and Guns N' Roses delivering pure, raw concert authenticity in Sweet Child of Mine. Then there was a-ha pushing the absolute boundaries of animation, while bands like Whitesnake essentially wrote the visual playbook for glam metal. They trained us to expect a full-blown visual feast.
Which brings us perfectly to pillar number 2, the rise of megastars, or as I like to call them, the titans of pop.
You really can't talk about the 80s without talking about Michael Jackson. He completely mastered this new visual landscape. By treating the music video as a high-budget art form, his album Thriller sold a jaw-dropping 65 million copies worldwide. That's a level of global superstardom that was just unimaginable before then.
The commercial dominance in this era was just off the charts. Literally. Jackson held down 9 total #1 hits during the decade. But right alongside him, you had Whitney Houston shattering historical records by landing 7 consecutive #1 hits on the Billboard charts.
What really fueled this massive success was crossover appeal. Icons like Madonna, Prince, and Houston used their incredible talent combined with heavy MTV rotation to cross over from niche R&B or dance charts straight into the mainstream pop charts. Being able to unite those massive, diverse audiences, that's the secret sauce that cemented their global legacies.
Okay, let's move into our third pillar, the second British invasion, where the UK essentially conquers the American charts.
This invasion escalated so incredibly fast. Around early 1983, radio consultants actually started advising American stations to play more UK bands just to capture their fresh, experimental vibe. By July, half of the US top 40 singles were British, and by April 1984, 40 of the top 100 singles were UK acts. It was a total takeover, happening in the blink of an eye.
MTV VJ Nina Blackwood captures the essence of why this happened beautifully. She pointed out that these artists were incredibly theatrical, and they knew how to use fashion and makeup perfectly. Britain was the birthplace of glam rock, right? So artists like Duran Duran and Culture Club naturally capitalized on this new visual shift, creating a kind of teen hysteria we really hadn't seen since Beatlemania. Simply put, America was ready for anything, and the stranger, the better. Audiences were absolutely starving for this quirky, synth-heavy pop. Extreme visual experimentation, we're talking flashy outfits and wild haircuts, directly translated into massive commercial success.
Now for pillar number 4, blending genres to create a totally modern sound.
There's a fascinating musical evolution that happens here. Think back to the late 70s, it's all about arena rock and disco. Then, punk comes along and strips everything down to its raw, rebellious basics. But the real magic sparked with new wave. Bands like The Cars took those familiar, big arena rock guitars and cleverly injected them with a cool, synth-driven edge, blending it all into something completely fresh. The frontman of The Cars, Rico Kasich, summed up the ethos of the decade perfectly. He said you can either make art or make money, but if you do it well, you can achieve both. In the 80s, you absolutely didn't have to choose.
You could be incredibly edgy and experimental while still appealing to millions of people.
And this genre blending was happening everywhere. You had bands like Alabama selling over 24 million albums by mixing country with southern rock. Meanwhile, REM took punk and folk to build a massive grassroots following on underground college radio. And then you have Metallica taking underground thrash speed metal and pushing it straight into mainstream spaces. Blending influences was basically the ultimate cheat code of the 80s.
All right, let's dive into our final pillar, number 5, fashion, formats, and culture, the true lifestyle of the 80s. You see, 80s music wasn't just something you passively listened to. It dictated how you dressed. It's like you wore your playlist on your sleeve. Pop fans were layering lace and neon colors. Hip-hop heads were rocking tracksuits and thick gold chains. Punks had the ripped jeans and leather jackets, while the glam metal crowd teased their hair literally to the ceiling. The music built these incredibly passionate, highly visual communities.
And we have to talk about the physical formats, because they drove this culture just as much as the clothes. Easily copyable cassette tapes were an absolute game changer. They empowered DIY punk and hip-hop scenes to share mixtapes and completely bypass the major labels. At the same time, vinyl records turned big, bold album art into iconic brand statements, while CDs were just emerging to showcase pristine, brand-new digital recording methods.
So when we step back and look at the whole picture, the 1980s remains so iconic because it fundamentally rewired music. It went from a purely auditory experience to this massive, comprehensive lifestyle. It was the highly choreographed video you watched, the bold fashion you wore, and the mixtape you actually held in your hands.
I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. When you're scrolling today, watching aesthetic videos, or following a musician's highly curated persona on social media, how much of that is still operating on the exact playbook written back in the 1980s? It's pretty wild to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you on the next one.